We all have used a rideshare app like Uber at some point in our life. Sometimes the ride can went very well, sometimes it can be good, and sometimes you have to run for your life. Here are 3 horrible Uber ride stories that will make you think twice whenever you're about to book a ride, especially when you are alone. A few weeks ago me 23-year-old female and a friend 24-year-old female planned to go to an event together. Since we only had free time after work, we decided to get an Uber so we wouldn't take too long to arrive and could enjoy more. The first half of the ride was really normal, seemed like a normal polite dude. But as soon as we got to the highway his attitude changed, he seemed a lot more irritated. Me and my friend didn't pay much attention though and kept chatting between us. Our attention was drawn when he started shouting with another driver. He turned to us and said he was going to pull over. I tried objecting, but he ignored and pulled over anyway. He reached out for the glove compartment and pulled a gun. Important to note that guns are illegal in my country. We were just watching this unfold while holding our breaths, and when the other guy drove away, we let out a sigh of relief. But then, we were still stuck in a car with a crazy man with a gun. After that, he went back to driving and apologized to us, saying that the guy was tailgating him. I let out an "oh, got it." He kept talking, "That guy is lucky that you 2 girls are here, or else I would have followed him and shoot him in the face." Sleazy idiot. I look over to my friend, she's in shock and paralyzed. I'm in shock too, but trying to keep my cool because the last thing I want to is to get him annoyed at us. If he was willing to shoot that guy for tailgating, I didn't want to know what he would do to us if I said the wrong thing. "No, it's okay, I understand," I say trying to appease him. "These guys need to be taught a lesson," he continued while I just agreed with my head. "I did that before you know, you just trap the guy in an empty street and when he leaves the car, bang. Did he just admit to murder?" It was the only thing running through my mind, but I managed to keep calm and just agreed with him the rest of the way. He did deliver us in the right place with no more incidents. I waited a few weeks to report since he had my home address and wouldn't be hard to figure out who reported him. Nobody showed up in my home with a gun, at least until now. One night, my boyfriend and I were out drinking and hanging out with our friends and went back to our other friend's apartment that lived about 10 to 15 minutes away from our home in the next town. It was getting pretty late and we both had work the next day, so we called an Uber to pick us up. Our Uber gets there, everything is fine, we make small casual talk as you usually do in Uber. The vibe was fine, the dude seemed nice enough, nothing to worry about. I was just exhausted and wanted to go home. Then out of nowhere, I remember feeling like wide awake. We get to the end of a street and I recognize it as being close-ish to our homes, and while I'm really bad at directions, this was a turn where the driver should make a right to go towards our homes. The guy gets to the stoplight and flicks his left blinker on. I immediately start looking around and look to my boyfriend, who's clearly on edge. My boyfriend asks the driver where he's going because this is clearly the wrong way, and he tells my boyfriend not to worry, that he's from the area and he knows a shortcut. Whatever, we both relax a little bit, especially because this was a main road and there were plenty of side streets around that he could have been cutting through. Then he gets to another stoplight and has the ability to either make a right, which would put him going towards the general direction of where we have to go, or left, which was going in the direction of the next town. He flicks his left blinker on again, and at this point, I notice that he has the Uber app and GPS tracking totally off. His entire phone was off. So there's nothing tracking his driving or location, and he's not being monitored by the app. My heart starts beating, and I get my phone to call 911 and held onto my car keys because I have this shiv-like stabby weapon thing as a keychain. Stay strapped, sisters. My boyfriend flies out of his seat and lunges towards the front seat, so he's like half standing up and starts yelling asking the guy where the F he's going because we know that this is the wrong way. The guy immediately flicks his right blinker on instead and skirts into the right lane instead of the left where he had previously been. He says sorry over and over again, and my boyfriend says you know what, never mind, we're gonna get out right here, this is fine, please unlock the doors. When he went to unlock the doors the driver freaked out, got really defensive and on edge, and was like no I am sorry, I promise I'll take you home now, I'm going the right way now, I am so sorry buddy, I got you. It seemed like he was admitting that he was taking us in the totally wrong direction. I can't remember if we just rode the rest of the way in that Uber because there were likely no other ones around at that hour and we felt like we called the guy out enough that he wouldn't do anything. The most chilling parts about this for me was how he had his app off and how he was so quick to correct himself as soon as we noticed, like he didn't even try to come up with a cover story to justify his actions. He admitted that before my boyfriend freaked him out, he was not taking us to our destination. We reported that guy the next day on the Uber app and have never come in contact with him since. I work in food service, front of house, so, in the early days of the pandemic with restaurants closed, I was taking work wherever I could find it. An old friend clued me into a medical office that needed someone to come in and do a bit of light filing. I was able to go in at night to limit direct contact with people, so I jumped at the opportunity right away. I wanted to avoid the bus if I could, due to crowds, so I decided to swing for a rideshare app. It's not all that expensive in my area, and I really didn't want a virus. I headed in at almost 3 a.m. because it was after the cleaning crew had left. I stumbled onto the block looking for my ride, and to my tired self's great relief, the car spotted me almost immediately and pulled up asking, "Uber?" While I cluelessly wandered up and down the street searching. The ride was taking a while, but I'd only just moved here last year, so I'm not familiar with all of the surrounding areas and thought nothing of it. I was pretty alert at first, so was trying to pass the time playing games on my phone and stuff. But the car didn't have a compatible phone charger, and I wasn't sure the building would have one, so I wanted to save my battery to be able to call a ride back. I shut my phone down into airplane mode and eventually drifted off from a combination of tiredness and boredom. I don't often take rideshare, so being alone with a strange driver often put me a bit on edge, but this guy had a pretty boring car and a very standard look about him. He looked a little like my brother even. Young, clean-kept, listening to jazz, nothing that screamed you need to micromanage this trip. When we arrived, the driver tried to wake me up by calling to me from the front, but I was in too deep of a sleep and couldn't fully distinguish it from my dream. Finally, he awkwardly jimmied my leg to wake me up and kept saying, "Ma'am, we're here now." I was embarrassed that I'd been that out of it, so just gave a hurried thanks. And booked it out of the car and into the building. As I looked around, I began to realize nothing was what I had expected of an office park. I had seen a street view of the building when I first looked up the business, and it had appeared to be a strip mall plaza. The further I went, the more loudly alarm bells were ringing in my gut. The structure was semi-dilapidated and it was pitch black dark past the entryway. I expected some lights to be off in the nighttime, but not to the whole building. I skittered across the concrete foundation comprising what was left of the lobby area, told myself they must just be renovating, and followed signs for the stairs. After what felt like ages but was likely just a few minutes, all I had passed was construction equipment, a couple locked doors, and some smashed windows. I was certain I was not going to find a medical office and figured maybe I had mixed up the address. I took out my phone to double check, but once I got it out of airplane mode, I could barely get a signal. I kept moving around in the building, pacing, looking for a stronger signal. I eventually confirmed in my texts that I had written down the correct address just by scrolling back, which didn't require service. Since I had only been inside for a few minutes at most, I figured I should try and get in touch with the driver, because if I entered the correct address, then it was only fair he should continue my ride to the correct place and save me the added fees of calling a second trip, considering this was all his mix-up. The app was taking forever to load with my slow service, but before I could get to a cloud of reception, I heard a rustling sound in the lower level of the building. I was on the top floor and the only stairwell I was aware of was the one I had taken up. There was no way to exit the situation without encountering whoever was downstairs. In an abandoned building in the latest hours of the night, I figured the chances were high that it was a tweaker, and I had no desire to try slipping past a tweaker. Especially when it was late enough that they were probably on something so jumpy and on edge. I tried to get a text out to a group of friends with my address and a request to call 911 to help get me from the property because I didn't feel safe walking in that neighborhood at night and didn't have enough reception to call a new ride, but the message wasn't sending. Reception was too weak. So I gave up on getting my phone going and started checking for another stairwell or even window with balconies or dumpsters that could be used to exit the second floor as a last resort in the event whoever was downstairs came upstairs. I scrambled over to a door with a stairs sign on it, but the stairs were completely dilapidated and it was essentially just a straight drop down to the first floor. At that point, the worst case scenario began to unfold. I heard whoever was downstairs begin making their way up the stairs. I thought fast and figured based on my walkabout the floor was basically a giant loop, so I would have to wait for whoever this was to come up the stairs, wait for them to come all the way up, and then sprint the opposite direction of wherever they were going, and try to get down the stairs and out of the building in time to make it to the road without encountering them. I was not anticipating being chased or anything, but didn't want to piss off a druggie or have a homeless person who might be living there feel as though I'd trespassed and become hostile towards me, or have any sort of interaction that could possibly occur at that hour in an abandoned industrial park. I held my breath for what felt like 5 minutes, but was likely closer to just 30 seconds, and the person appeared at the top of the stairs. To my great relief, it was just the Uber driver. I figured he had come back for me, realizing he had left me in the wrong spot, a place that could have worked out to be dangerous. So I came out from the beam I was hidden behind and started to wave him down. But then I processed that there was no way for him to realize this had been the wrong address. My stomach lurched forward and my blood chilled to slush. I made eye contact with him very briefly and he was completely calm, but breathing pretty heavily and blocking the stairwell down. On a normal, rational day as an outside observer, I could think of a dozen innocent reasons he might have returned. But in the moment, standing across from him, I just knew in my gut that this was someone with ill intent. I can't remember much more from the ensuing few minutes. Operating solely on muscle memory and instinct, I Superman dove for the second stairwell's opening and just let myself fall down the drop. Thankfully I don't think he'd seen where I'd gone at first, and though I was in too much pain to know it then, plenty was bruised, but nothing was completely broken. I scrambled up and threw myself at anything that seemed like it could be the door. It was too dark to tell, I was disoriented from the fall, and I wasn't in a calm enough mindset to think to use my phone flashlight. Just before I was able to reach the door, it flew open with a blinding light, beaming straight into my eyes. My first thought, not totally coherent, was there's another one of these guys, and I stumbled backwards, trying to find something to hide behind. Before I could, a voice called out, "Alright, this is the police department, everyone get on your knees with your hands in the air." I didn't believe it was the police at first. I was in such a fight or flight mode and had already committed to flight that I continued looking for ways to get out. But he kept shining the flashlight right at me. "Hey," I said on the ground, "right now. Hands out where I can see them." He sounded so authoritative that I just automatically did exactly as he asked. He approached me and finally shined the light away from me. It took a second to get my night vision, but once I did I could see he was really a police officer. I tried to explain what was happening, but first he started asking me all these questions, and combined with what had just happened and my fear of the driver coming back, all snowballed into me being unable to form a single articulate sentence. He was even asking easy questions too, like, "Can you tell me your name? Do you have any knives, needles, or anything that could poke or cut me? Would you rather talk in here or outside?" And my total stunned babbling in response at first led him to believe I was on something. He directed me out to his car, and once I was safely out of the building, I was able to start getting my bearings, just a little. I sat on the edge of the back seat of the squad car, with the door open facing out, while he stood across from me and asked the same questions again. The first thing I could think to ask was, "Did my friends call you? What did they tell you?" And he explained no, nobody called him, he was patrolling the area and noticed a car idling outside of this building that's known to be condemned and nobody's supposed to be inside, and when they are, they're up to no good. He was launching into a speech about how if I'd gone to shoot up or meet a John, he had resources he could direct me to, and that this was not an ideal place to do either of those things, and asking if I had somewhere safe to stay that night. But I was stuck on something else he'd said. Finally it all clicked. The car. I spilled my whole rideshare story in a frantic word vomit. He looked around and the car wasn't there anymore. The officer guessed the guy had driven off while we were talking inside the building. He asked me all the details I remembered and I told him, but there weren't many. I'd been too tired when the ride started, but the officer realized I could pull up my Uber app and get all the information. There wasn't really enough reception there, even outdoors, so we sped down the road, and once I had enough bars the app roared to life, and I had 4 missed notifications from Uber. They said, "Hello, I've arrived. And I don't see you. Can you confirm the pickup address is correct? And I am flashing my hazards. And finally, unfortunately your driver had to cancel." At first I thought the driver was so cunning as to pick me up while sending these fake messages and cancelling so the GPS wouldn't track us, knowing I wouldn't notice because I was asleep with my phone off and exonerating himself. But instead I checked the car details, checked again, and it was definitely not the same driver. The person who'd driven me there had not been my Uber. My driver was somewhere else on the street when this guy pulled up to me. The policeman took my statement and said they would keep an eye out for the guy, but the best I could give them to go off of was basically young-looking Caucasian man with brown hair, sideburns, goatee, and four-door sedan. Wearing a zip-up sweatshirt. Maybe had a hood. Which is, like, 1 out of every 4 guys in the city. I feel so blessed to have survived this near miss. Suffice it to say, I do not take ride-share services anymore.